In this video, we're going to be looking at the main bones that make up the human skull. So for here, I have two models. I have this white Samso model and this multicolored model. So we're going to be looking at just the overall bones first. So first I'm going to use this multicolored skull because this is where we can actually see the different bones kind of with all the different colors through here. So starting at the front, so this big bone at the most anterior kind of superior region is called the frontal bone. This one in yellow, we have frontal. And then making up the walls of the skull, on either side, you have the two parietal bones. Parietal means wall, so forming the walls of the skull, so on either side. On the posterior side, at the base, is going to be the occipital bone. So one of the ways you can remember occipital, it has this big O through here. We'll learn this is the foramen magnum that the spinal cord is going to be traveling through. So that's going to be the occipital bone. On the sides, through here, this is the temporal bone. And you think you kind of feel your temples near your ear area. That's going to be the temporal bone. Okay, there's a large hole out here. That's where your ear is sitting on top of. This is the auditory foramen canal. So you have another temporal bone on this side as well. There's another one on that side. So then looking at the front, the cheekbones, this bone in yellow is called the zygomatic bone. So this kind of unique shaped bone here, zygomatic bone, you have one on either side. And then you have the bones that are making up your jaw. So you have the two that are making up the upper jaw. These are called the maxilla. And then you have the lower portion of the jaw made up by the mandible. Okay, so the different parts of the mandible there. It's kind of saying some stuff. All right, so those are the larger bones, and then we're going to look at some of these smaller ones. So forming the bridge of the nose, this little piece right here on either side is the nasal bone. So we got nasal bone, and then tucked on the kind of inner tear duct region is the lacrimal bone. So this orange one through here, lacrimal, with the lacrimal glands forming the tears that are over there through the lacrimal duct. So that's going to be the lacrimal bone through there. So you have nasal bone on top, lacrimal bone kind of more lateral or in the orbit region. And then in the nasal area, we have a couple different bones. So one is going to be a bone that's going to be easier to see when it's outside of the skull, but it's this one where you can start to kind of see some of the pieces in there. Let me see if I can, kind of illuminate this a little bit better. So through here, this is going to be part of the ethmoid bone, those little things that are hanging off there. You can also see part of the ethmoid bone within the orbital region. So it's going to be within that eye socket area through there. It's all one bone. It's kind of like a walnut-shaped bone. You also have a part of it peeking through on this side. Okay, so that's all part of the ethmoid bone. And then also within the nasal cavity, on the lower portion right in the middle, is going to be the vomer. So that's going to be this one. It's going to meet up with part of the ethmoid forming the nasal septum. And then on the inside, trying to get the best view here, on either side, you have these ridges of bone through there that are called the inferior nasal conch, or you could say inferior nasal conchae. Conch is the better pronunciation though. I'm trying to move my light so you can see this a little bit better perhaps because it's kind of shaded in there. So this bone right there, that's going to be the vomer, one in orange in this model. And then these yellow ones on the lateral sides, all by itself, is called the inferior nasal conchae. You do have a superior and a middle. Those are going to be attached to the ethmoid bone itself. Okay, so in lab, you'll want to take advantage to get a little bit better view of those bones. And then there's one we haven't mentioned yet. So this one in red, that's called the sphenoid bone. So it's going to be this kind of wing-shaped one. There's part of it peeking through here. There's pieces forming in the temple area. So part of the sphenoid bone is where the frontal, parietal, and temporal all meet up. In fact, that's the weakest point of the skull there, the thinnest point. You can see a part of it kind of peeking through at the back of the orbital region. So all of this in red is making up the sphenoid bone. So it's tucked behind the ethmoid bone. So sphenoid and ethmoid are, I think, better seen whenever they're looking at by themselves, but for now, we're just looking at how things are all orientated together. And then remember there's one more, and that's going to be underneath here. So we have the maxilla bone, the top part of the jaw. There's this bone right here, this thinner piece, okay, on the posterior side. So towards the back, posterior side, this is going to be the palatine bone. So think it's like at the roof of your palate. Okay, so that's finding all the major bones with this model here. I'm going to put this one off to the side. And then looking at the same bones, but just on the plain white skull. So again, we start at the front here. This is going to be the frontal bone. And this is going to be separated. All these bones are separated by what are called sutures. They're kind of hard to see depending on which model you're looking at, but there are these thin lines between the different bones. So at the front, we have the frontal bone. And then if you remember on the sides was the parietal bones. Here you have one on either side. You got the parietal bones. Then the bone on the back of the skull. All of this is going to be the occipital bone. Okay, there's that O, that foramen magnum. On the sides, it's going to be the temporal bone. So through here, all of this is part of the temporal bone. This part here extending out is going to meet up with the zygomatic bone. So the part of the bone through here. So temporal, you have one on either side. This is also temporal. This is zygomatic here. The different parts of the jaw. We have the maxilla. You technically have two of them that are going to form one entire unit. And then the lower portion is called the mandible through there. On the bridge of the nose, remember those smaller bones were called the nasal bones, left and right. And then there's a smaller set of bones on the inner eye socket area called the lacrimal bones on either side there. In the nasal area, there's 3 bones that you can see. So those ridges there, those are part of the ethmoid bone through there. It's going to meet up with this lower portion here. That's the vomer, this triangular shaped bone in there. And then these curls that are on either side, those are the inferior nasal conch. Again, you have a superior in the middle. They're actually going to be part of the ethmoid bone, so we'll look at those in another video. But these ones that are hanging out by themselves are considered their own individual bone. So again, the ethmoid is kind of, there's pieces of it here coming underneath the nose. Sphenoid is found in lots of different areas. Part of it's peeking through at the temporal region here. On either side, this part in the back of the eye socket, that's also part of the sphenoid bone through here. And there it is on that side. And then part of it's actually showing up underneath here. Okay, these ridges right there are also part of the sphenoid bone. In fact, this is going to be the back of the vomer. And then if you remember, we have that last set of bones, that palatine bone, that's going to be tucked on the posterior side of the maxilla bone. Okay, so there's a line that's going to be separating that. So this portion, these spikes here, that's the palatine bone. We'll talk about on the maxilla, this is the palatine process, but for now, this is the palatine bone. Okay, so those are the main structures to know for the entire skull models.